Hello, everybody. This is A.L. Johnson with A.L. Johnson Life Insurance Agency, and this is one of our highlights where we like to highlight people in the community that are doing great things. And today we have a very special person. I'm excited to have her here, Dr. Cokethea Hill. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with Ms. Hill, she is the founder of BLAQUE KC, which advocates for equity in education for our children. In addition to that, she's also sat on the city council board, the UNI, Urban Neighborhood Initiative, the Urban League of Kansas City, and so many other things. And so before we get started, Dr. Hill, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me on the show and for letting BLAQUE have just a spot on your platform to talk about Black kids and what we can do to improve the outcomes, academic and life outcomes for Black kids. So thank you.
Love it, love it. We're going to wait for a few people to get in. For those of you, as you come in, if you can give us a like or a heart, just some kind of thumbs up to let us know that the information is coming through okay, you can hear us and things like that. I'd appreciate it. Also, make sure that you share this with your network because this is going to be a very important conversation. It's going to cover a lot of things that are important to you and our children. So this is very important. If you have any questions or comments that you want to add to the conversation, please leave those in the chat and we'll try to address as many of those as possible. And so to start off, Ms. Hill, brag on yourself a little bit. So I did some research and it looks like you have done a little bit of everything. You have served the Kansas City community in so many different capacities. I may have missed a couple things. And so can you just tell us over the years, what are some things that you have done for the Kansas City community?
Yeah, well, first, I just like to start out by saying I am a KCPS alum. I graduated from Lincoln College Preparatory Academy. So when people talk about KCPS made, there used to be a tagline. And, you know, my start in really thinking through like advocacy and community organizing happened for me in 2008 around it was Senator Barack Obama who was sweeping through the nation wanting to be president. And that was kind of like the first bug of like, this is my time. So many other things happened before me in civil rights. You know, where is the event that's going to happen that I can be a part of? And so coming off of the 2008 election, there were 2 seats available on the school board, signed up to say, hey, I want to interview and be appointed. So I was appointed to serve on the KCPS school board 2008 through 10. And certainly I started to think about, you know, as a guidance counselor, just having a different vantage point. I worked in the district, you know, prior to that. And then the city council, that was another opportunity where I was organizing in community and there was a vacancy and I got appointed to the city council to serve an unfulfilled term, have worked in philanthropy for Kauffman Scholars and School Smart KC. So I've had these vantage points of one, being a young Black person living in urban core Kansas City, going through public school, to serving on a public school board, to working on a periphery of nonprofits with United Way, to School Smart philanthropy directly to education, to us being on the city council. So just really thinking about how schools and communities are connected. That's been my life's work. And I've been, you know, super excited every day.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So you obviously have a passion for education. You have a passion for the community. Yes. Where did that come from?
Well, you know, I often talk about, you know, in leadership being vulnerable. So for me, even though I, you know, come from a 2-parent household, my father died when I was 16 years old. My life kind of shifted and changed. I lost my best friend a year after that. She died of ovarian cancer. So all this happened in my senior year. And if it were not for my counselor then at the time, Barbara Ponder, who I talk about a lot, Lincoln Prep, who had always instilled in me that I can be anything and do anything and go anywhere. If it had not been a network of teachers and community people who loved on me and encouraged me to still go off to college and chase my dreams, I wouldn't be here today. Certainly, a girl from urban core Kansas City who eventually went on to earn a doctorate from KU. And so I think that if any step in the way, if I did not have caring adults around me, I don't think I'll be here. And so some of this work for BLAQUE is me giving back to that, to another little girl or boy who was in my space, who grew up economically challenged, who believed that they can do all things, but needed some support and coaching from others to help them get there.
Love it. Love it. So I was taking a look, you had a banner and I just want to read it here and just kind of ask for you to expound on your thought. You said, we believe it is our duty to disrupt systems that create barriers to Black children realizing their full potential.
That's right.
What are some of those barriers?
You know, first of all, I want to acknowledge that standardized testing is never a measurement that can capture a student's ability. It certainly is not a measure of intellect. It certainly isn't a full snapshot of all that goes involved in teaching and learning. But it is a way for us to just compare to see how this educational system is performing for kids across different groups: race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status. And what we find is when you control for all other factors, that means, let's say a kid started out, a Black kid and a white kid started out with the same two-parent households. Socioeconomically, they were the same across there. They went to the same school. They lived in the same neighborhood. What we find is that race is still a very strong predictor of student outcomes. And what we find is in this educational system, not just in Kansas City, but nationally across the board, the school system is producing disparate outcomes for Black kids as compared to their non-Black counterparts. And what we believe at BLAQUE is when we go back and look historically, we realize that while Brown versus Board was really great for integration, it really forced the closure of then, when we had segregated schools, Black schools, and it forced our babies to integrate into a system that wasn't designed for them. And it wasn't designed for them out of like nefarious reasons. It's during segregated times, there was a school that was developed for white kids that they went to, and it was a school developed for Black kids, right, that they went to. So you imagine that the Black school closed, teachers are laid off and fired, and those kids are now integrating into a system that wasn't designed for them, that initially didn't want them, that created all types of covert ways of isolating them. And over time, right, we've had new people who are running these systems, but so much of its structure still has vestiges in that racialized school system. So it's up to us to say, when we look at data and it's producing disparate outcomes, that means outcomes that are not in line to the proportion of kids that we have in that school district, that's a first indicator that the system is not performing well. And so our job is to say, hey, let's look at those systems, whether it's special education or discipline or policies, curriculum, and find ways to like disrupt what's happening in that system that unintentionally causes harm to our babies.
Love it, love it. Just really quick, so we've got a comment from Melvin Lamont Brown. He's actually with the Kansas City Public School System. He's the community engagement for Northeast High School, and so we appreciate you tuning in. Always appreciate your support. He says, I see quite a bit of this in our school system. Absolutely, absolutely, I agree with that. Again, if you are tuning in, give us a like or a heart. Let us know that everything is coming through okay on your end, and make sure that you share this conversation with your network because it's extremely important for our children. And so you mentioned something about the disproportionate lower test scores among Black children. I was looking at some statistics from the Brookings Institution, and it said that over the past 30 years, 2022 was the lowest that we've scored on our ACT scores across the country, but disproportionately, Black children had the lowest test scores. What do you think are some of the contributing factors to that?
Yeah, there is, a school of thought that talks about, the ACT and SAT, and certainly you're starting to see colleges post-pandemic really rethink if these are good measures of someone's academic ability in the school. So there's a school of thought that says these tests are not norm for Black kids. They certainly are not written with, Black authors or psychometricians in the creation of the test. So there's one space, right? What I would say to you, just as a nation, we've known that our school system has not been as competitive as it needs to be globally. Oftentimes we talk about, how the system is producing these poor academic outcomes for Black and Brown students. But if you look just here in the state of Missouri, right, only 17% of all Black kids in the state of Missouri are on grade level. But if you look at just in general, it's about 56%. So if you get a test back and your teacher writes 56% on it, you are not celebrating like, oh my God, I killed this test, right? You're saying, oh, I have work to do. So we know that as a state, as a society, we are asking and trying to equip kids to solve challenges that the world has not yet seen. And so while we've had these innovations with technology and allows us to communicate and to connect with people all across the world, we really, as a society, need to rethink the way that we're schooling our children. So I think that what we're finding is, how do we make this relevant? How do we talk to our students in an age where everything for them is digital, right? We used to bring books home. Remember, Mr. Johnson, right?
Yeah.
We had books and we had lockers, and now with my son, most of his books are on his tablet.
Exactly.
It's a different way of learning and being in the world, and we have to adjust schooling for that.
Let's unpack that a little bit more, because they're saying that Kansas City is becoming one of the new tech hubs like Silicon Valley. And so I was reading a report that said Kansas City and St. Louis are among two of the top cities in tech, and specifically women in the tech industry. And so while we have all of that going on, all these different advances, how do you feel that our school system is doing as far as their job in preparing our children for the next generation? We have artificial intelligence coming into play. I don't know if you're familiar with ChatGPT, but a lot of these things are going to replace millions of jobs around the country. And so how do you feel that our children are being prepared? And if they are not, what are some things that we can do or look into?
Yeah, I think you're starting to see, at least here locally, some shifts around real world learning. It is, how do you create connections and business and the jobs that are on the horizon to kids while they are still in school. And if you think about a traditional pipeline of a teacher, right? A teacher goes out to college, decides that education is the space they want to go in. They get this bachelor's, and then they get a certification. The certification may look like math, or maybe science, or K-8, or high school. So you get all these levels of certification. But just because you can teach the concepts doesn't mean that you are actually keeping track with what's happening in the industry. And so I think we're going to hopefully move to a space where the creators of tech companies are actually teaching the content through partnerships with schools, so that teachers can stay current. They can still follow the grade level expectations or what the state requires you to teach, right? But what the state requires you to teach and the components versus what's happening in the industry and what is being created in real time, there's a lag. And quite often, a teacher can be really great at connecting with students and creating a lesson plan and talking about the, like the core components, but they might not be as adept to using the technology. Certainly, my son is 9. And it surprises me, he wanted Instagram and then, of course, Facebook, and I was versed on that. But then he had 3 or 4 other apps that I had to catch up my knowledge with. And so kids are in this world of seeing, doing, playing. And if we don't figure out how to capture that excitement around education and bring partnerships into the classroom that can teach kids what's happening right now. And frankly, my son can probably create an app. He can watch it on YouTube, figure out how to do it. So these kids are wanting to do this now. They don't have a year to wait till you get to the 3rd quarter to teach a particular component, right? They want it now. And so when I talk about not tinkering around the edges and really thinking about how to reshift our lens around schooling, some of that is part of it, is bringing the experts and the creators into the classrooms to help us co-create curriculum that matches what's happening in the real world right now.
I love that. I love that. Absolutely. I was actually having a conversation with State Representative Michael Johnson, District 23, before we got on. And he actually mentioned something for the business community that kind of mirrors what you're saying about the children. I do think it's important for the businesses and enterprises that are making money in our community to pour back into it by providing some of that education for our children. He had the idea of small business showers and adoption programs. And so say if you start a small business, maybe someone who has been in business for years beyond you, they're successful, they actually adopt your business so that it can increase the rate of businesses that are able to remain open and successful in our communities. And so just really quick, what are your thoughts about that type of program?
Yeah, I think all of that is great. I mean, certainly you need folks that show up and work in the industry each and every day are going to be more versed than someone who is not in the industry, but teaching what they learned 4 or 5 years ago. Technology is one of those spaces where like math won't change. The way we do math will, but 2 + 2 is always going to equal 4, no matter what. But algorithms and the way that people are connecting and the technology that they are choosing, that evolve is organic, is living. And so the more that we can create partnerships with people who are in the space doing the work would be so helpful to our kids. I also think that there is a level of investment. If you go back and look at how our schools are performing for Black kids, if only 17% of the kids are reading on grade level, and that's even lower when you think about math and science, are we creating the conditions to where even if a business says, hey, I want a partner, that kid is ready, that scholar is ready to take advantage. And so we know we have to start that very early in elementary. And you'll be surprised. I mean, I practice everything with my son, right? My son had created his own email account when he was in kindergarten, right? He was already, talking about mom, Zoom with me, and we're in the house together because that's his world. I always say I am a visitor. I'm a foreigner, right, to the tech space, but he's a native. He's coming into this not knowing any other way to communicate but that. So his ability to think about it and visualize it is much different than all of the, unconscious barriers I'm going to have in my mind, because I remember when you picked up the phone. I remember when people just had meetings. I remember before LinkedIn and all these things came along.
You remember having a pager, don't you?
I had a pager.
You had a pager on your head.
If you had a pager,
had to make sure you had some quarters so you could stop at the payphone. Right.
Like the payphone. My son said the other day, we were listening to a song. He said, Mom, you want to hear a song from the 1990s? I was thinking like, what you mean the 1990s? But that is so far ago.
Right.
He was like, why would you pay for a song when you can just Google it? I'm like, it didn't used to be like that, son. You actually bought CDs.
It was hilarious because like a couple months ago, I was sitting having a conversation with my children, and my daughter just realized, she was like, Dad, you were born in the 1900s. I was like, whoa, like the 1900s, yeah. And so, no, before we go any further, for those of you that are tuning in, we definitely appreciate you and your support. We thank you. Please share this with your network. I'm having a conversation with Dr. Cokethea Hill, who is the founder of BLAQUE KC, which advocates for equity and education for our children. We have a few comments here in the comment section that I want to address really quick. Mr. Melvin Brown said, hi, Cokethea, keep up the great work. She is doing the great work. Thank you. We got Dinner and Dialogue. This is a good friend of mine, Andrew Boykin. He actually has a nonprofit called The Restoration, which is about rebuilding our communities. And so his question is, how do you feel the parents of these children who are about to react to this uncomfortable change in their dynamic, which sometimes continues the fluctuation and instability in the child's life? And so we were talking about all of these different changes as far as technology, et cetera. The parent has to come along. So we're talking about the school system and what they may be providing or not, but how can the parents prepare themselves?
Yes. BLAQUE, we always talk about one of our non-negotiables is that parents are at the center of the conversations that we have, right? And so I think for some, when you ask a parent, what is your hope and dream for your kid? Right? Parents have these big hopes and dreams for their kids. Nobody says, oh, I just want to send my kid to a failing school and for them to drop out and for our family to stay in the same economic status that we've been in. Every parent wants to push their next generation further than they were, right? And so I think we have to talk to parents about what does that look like? And then what are the gaps that we're not seeing in education? If you think a couple of weeks ago, independent school district voted and approved to go to a 4-day school week, right? And while many folks were so excited about that 4-day school week, immediately parents who work are thinking, hey, where's my kid going to go on the 5th day? And so some of that work we can do is around partnering with community to say, if this shift needs to happen, what does the digital divide looks like? What access do parents have and where are the gaps? And how do we talk to philanthropy about, meeting bridging that gap, if it's in terms of buying equipment, making sure that we are educating our parents as well. And so I think that once parents understand that the change is to help their scholar, their kids, their children get to the next level and be competitive and be able to, to engage in this world in a way that sets them up for success, most parents, will say, hey, I'm down for this ride. Now there might be some things that they need help with, and that's on us. That's about community having intentional conversations and then trying to plug those gaps.
Definitely. Got another comment here from Miss Regina Drone. Regina Drone.
Hi,
Oh,
Regina.
you know Regina.
Yes.
Yes, she is absolutely awesome. She's the owner of Regina's All Access Realty, serving the Kansas City, Missouri, and Kansas City, Kansas community when it comes to building generational wealth through real estate. And so, definitely happy to have her. You were talking about your 10-year-old and the technology. She said that her 10-year-old is exactly the same. My children are the same. And so, this is something that we all deal with. Regina, thank you for tuning in. I definitely appreciate your support. Dinner and Dialogue. You said Cokethea for president.
Hey, I don't know. President of the PTA.
The president of the PTA. That's hilarious. So I've got a couple other questions here.
Yes.
Blueprint 2030, right? So I was taking a look at an old interview. And as we know, history repeats itself. And so we were looking at 2010. They closed, what was it, about 30 different schools. We had all of these abandoned buildings all over the city. Some of them have been repurposed for senior living. Some have turned into community centers, et cetera. But it looks like we're at that crossroad again where there are going to be schools closing. We have the legislative redistricting where they just kind of redrew the lines. And so the city's changing pretty rapidly. What are your thoughts on school closings?
Well, first, let me tell you all that I'm biased, right? As you mentioned before, in 2010, I believe it was, I was on the school board, and the school board was going through right sizing, right? And the idea is that this school district is not able to deliver fully on its promise to provide world-class education because we don't have enough money. Our resources are spread too thin. And so if we right size, if we close these schools, if we bring kids in, then we're able to do all these great things with the curriculum. And what we found is that no, the academic outcomes for kids did not change significantly from 2010 until now. And so 2015, right, it was another, we've got to close another schools. We want to deliver on the promise. We want to make sure all of our teachers have dual certification in reading. If we close these schools, the cost savings we will have will pour into the school, and these outcomes will change. And so by this time, right, when you have been a part of those movements and have seen them not go according to promise, you have to say, hold up, wait. First, what is the impact of school closure on our community? And what we found through our data town hall, we partner with Dr. Argan Sachioglu. He's at the University of Kansas. And we said, hey, let's look over the past, from I think we looked at maybe 2009 all the way up to 2018 to look at the impact of school closing. And if you guys want that, I can definitely send you the executive summary so that you can send out. We found that closing school buildings in low-income communities increases the incidence of crime. It reduces or lowers your property value. And so when you think, for many of us, our home is the greatest asset that we have in terms of creating generational wealth. You're able to remove equity out of your home to pay for your kid to go to college, to use it to improve your home if there's any big purchases. But if you live in a community where the property value is already low, and then the schools continue to close, which drops your property value about $15,000 for one school closing, then people find themselves upside down. So Regina can tell you as a realtor, it's hard for you to go in and take another loan on your house or pull out equity because you don't have it. And so we have to start saying, hey, KCPS, your largest bucket of funding comes from local property taxes. If you are depressing the value of that asset, then you will as my mom used to say, cut your nose to spite your face. Yes, you will have some early savings and maybe closing a school, but when it comes to collect those property taxes to feed that budget, you will have reduced that amount. So how do we take a look at, one, ensuring that the district is able to operate in an efficient way, right? If there are buildings that we need to close, how do we take care of kids so they transition to a school that provides a higher quality than the school that they were in? So if there's a school that was higher performing, how do we make sure that kids have access to that? And then how do we work with the neighborhood and the city and community planning so that that asset can turn into something that is beneficial for the community? And so those are some of the things that we wanted to highlight in Blueprint 2030. And I have to say, Dr. Collier, my hat's off to her. She showed courageous leadership, because as much as we are talking about, we were like beating down the door, like, do not close. We organize parents, we work with different groups. So she was hearing all of this raw emotion, and she was just like taking the plan that had already been in place to the next level. But they had said, hey, let's stand back. I think there is a lot of utility that's what's being said. We really do need to look at how can we be a good community partner. And instead of closing 10 schools, they're closing 2 schools. And we're going to learn a lot about what that transition support needs to look like. But then also she's going to have some community meetings. I think she has them organized around 4 or 5 categories, one being to approve a bond. And so, we're gonna dig in and lock in, because it's not about for us just disrupting something that can be potentially harmful, but then how do we build bridges and connect so that we can support the school district and in their plan to improve education for our kids.
Look, that was amazing. So many things to unpack there, but there was one thing that really stood out to me. When it comes to the tax revenue that comes into it to a certain area, we know that affects the budget, et cetera. What about some of the programs that are available in other areas versus our inner city? For example, I took my boys out shooting a few months back, and we were out in Piper. We were all the way in Kansas. And so my boys are pretty good. They got some pretty good aim. And so the instructor, he said, do you have them in a rifle club? And I was like, nah, there isn't a rifle club where we live. He was like, oh man, they should be in it. He said, what about archery club? Yes. We don't have archery club either. And so I noticed that when it comes to scholarships for our children, they're basically narrowed down to football, basketball, and academic. Right. What can we do to expand the available programs? Because we know that some of these other programs, such as, bowling, soccer, some of these other sports have far more room and opportunity for our children to get scholarships, but they're not even available at the schools. What can we do about that?
That's one of the things that Dr. Collier talked about in she's done a recasting of Vision Blueprint 2030, which I'm calling it like her vision for how Blueprint 2030 can offer more extracurricular opportunities for our kids. And certainly when she goes back to talking about having a bond to approve KCPS to leverage their buildings for resources to pour in, I think that's going to be super helpful. I also think that in Kansas City, we often operate in silos. And I'm saying it from the perspective of having been on the city council, right? The city council does not have any formal oversight of the school district, but not only do we share the same name, the city of Kansas City, Kansas City Public School District. And let me say, there are 14 different school districts that feed metropolitan Kansas City. So even though, we're talking about KCPS, this could work for Hickman Center, Lee Summit, all the different school districts. We really need a better partnership with our city council. There are infrastructure dollars that happen during this time. There are certainly opportunities to think about long-range city planning. I'm the vice chair of the City Planning Commission, where we see economic development deals come before us. If you think about this, just think about this for a second. If you're in the boundaries of Kansas City Public School District, which, goes as north as like the River Market area, all the way to, I think, maybe 85th, and you take state line over, you will not be able to find, and if I'm wrong, get in the chat and put it up there, and I will say I was wrong, but you will not be able to find a skating rink, a arcade, a place like, Urban Air or whatever the little jump bouncy places are. Monkey Business used to be a thing where people go, Chuck E. Cheese, you name it. None of that exists within the boundaries that we know 28,000 kids are going to school and district and charter. But not one place to celebrate your kid, to have parties for your kid to like. And then if you go to like a Silver Learning Center or a Kumon or all those other places, luckily for us, we have the Du Bois Learning Center that has been providing supplemental support to kids to help them with reading and math. But that is a city issue. And as a person who has been on city council, we are in the midst of city council's elections right along with school board. These are the conversations that you need to be having with your council. Like, what type of businesses, economic development opportunities? Because it is shameful that parents don't have places to play with their kids other than our parks. So we have great parks, right? But what happens if your kid's birthday is like my kid's birthday in December and it's freezing, right? Or October, or, in Kansas City now, it could be 30 degrees in March. But we've got to think about, we want this city where people want to live, work, and play. Play is big, because then we get our kids to school and we say, no, it's not the time for you to play. Sit down, be quiet, sit in this, single file line. And when the first time that they cut up, guess what we take from them? Recess. Right? So we're talking about kids that don't have a chance to play. So I'm like, that's first. When we start having those conversations, then AL, we can say, oh, if we had an archery club, where are they going to practice? We need to have that. Right?
I agree.
So that's not it kind of lays at the feet of the school district, because we're looking at them for like what other services, but that's our community and city to start saying, how do we create this infrastructure that's needed so that families have resources for their kids?
You just said a mouthful. For those of you that are just tuning in, I'm having a conversation with the great Dr. Cokethea Hill, the founder of BLAQUE KC. Show them your hoodie real quick. What's on your hoodie? Love it. Black Kansas City. I got to get mine. I need mine.
Look, and so for those Davis is on this call, he will make sure you have a hoodie, some pins, some swag. So yes. And
yeah, I got a rep
about that.
I got a rep. And so for those of you that want to follow Dr. Hill, you can visit her at blackKC.com. You see it right here on the screen, BLAQUE. Rundown of what is BLAQUE, what it is that you all do.
I'm sorry, I missed the last one. It was a little bit of a lag.
Oh no, what do you all do at BLAQUE KC?
Oh, what do we do? BLAQUE is really, I love the space that we're in, because so much of our work has been, and will continue to be informed by the community, by parents, by students. All I know is that when I started BLAQUE, I said, up until we started May 25th, 2020. And I always tell this little quiet story, because as I was thinking about launching BLAQUE, God had given me the vision for it. And, there might be Christians that is a little bit like me, that you kind of like think you can negotiate and box with God. Like, I don't really want to do this. I think there's something else I could be doing, Lord. But when you have a calling and anointing to do something, that the only way through it is to do it. And so when I launched BLAQUE, a lot of people were saying, man, the name is BLAQUE. Your name is Cokethea, you BLAQUE, will it not be inclusive? Will people not feel like there's an opportunity for allyship? And they said, maybe you should change the name. And the reason why I wanted to focus on Black kids is because everybody talked about the most marginalized at risk. They would use all these buzzwords, but the needle wasn't moving for Black kids. It's especially not compared to the type of investment that was happening in the space. And so May 25 was also the day that George Floyd was murdered later on. So we saw this kind of environment shift where people were starting to come to terms with racial reckoning and to be more thoughtful about like how do we become an ally? And it wasn't ostracized to have this intentional focus on what was happening in the world and certainly our space of education. So we first started with, all right, well, if we want to be at the seat of policy, where is policy made? And so for us, that's on school boards. or at the state, right? Education policy happens there. It also happens on school boards. So the very first undertaking that we had was in elections. We are a C4, and if you're not familiar with a C4, they operate just like a nonprofit because we are a nonprofit similar to a 501c3. The C4 tax designation allows you to use an insubstantial amount of your funding, no more than 40% of your overall funding, to directly get involved in elections. We cannot write check to candidates. We cannot go out and give them money to run. But what we are able to do is to run an ancillary campaign for the candidates that we endorse. At the time, it was Tanisha Ford and Candace Buckner. Those two women won, so we have governance. The second piece is leadership development. We will never ask you to step into a catalytic or a change position without giving you the tools, the resources, the social capital, the history of what's happening. So leadership development is a second bucket of our work. And then the first is really organizing and advocacy. We're going to share data. We're going to talk about systems. We will have town halls. We will bring people in. We do focus groups. So part of that organizing and advocacy is to stay close and connected to what's happening on the ground. What do kids want? What do parents want? What are school leaders saying? What are superintendents and teachers? We do all that talking. And then we start to say, okay, where can we make change? What type of programming do we need to have? And then how do we develop people to lead in those ways? So we have placed 17 folks on 13 different school boards in less than 2 years.
Amazing. Amazing work. And we appreciate everything that you do as a community. We really do. So for the second half of this interview, we're going to wrap it up soon. I know you're busy and you have things to do. I appreciate you taking out your time. But there's a couple questions, and this has to do with kind of forward thought and just kind of thinking and dreaming a little bit. And so we know that Kansas City has put a committee together on reparations. And this is a conversation that's going on all across the country. And so from your standpoint, there are a couple, schools of thoughts. Some people say that, hey, we don't need just money. And so if they were going to write everybody a check for $1 million, that may not be the best way to solve our systemic issues. And so when it comes to education and with the work you do at BLAQUE KC, if there were reparations and you were able to dictate a portion of those funds, what would it look like? What would you have them do with it?
Oh, that is such a big question. First of all, I think when I'm going to think about from my own lens, because it's always what's most proximate to you. I think about when I first tried to buy my first home, and I had a great job, had a good credit score, but I learned about this concept of income to debt. And because I had student loans, I had to consolidate my loans. So the first, I think, is if you are Black and have student loans, that should be automatically forgiven. Like done, right? I think also if you have kids that are going to 4-year state level colleges, that should not be a barrier, and if you look at the cost of college, I mean, it's on the rise. So I think in terms of that, I think if you want to take a trade or get a certification, or if you want to open up a barbershop, or if you want to become an entrepreneur, there ought to be pathways for you to be able to do that, where some of those barriers that have been so hard to jump over are kind of alleviated for you. When I think about inside K through 12 education, I'm looking at the data, and I certainly want to say that I believe that anyone with a heart for kids and willing to do not only their interpersonal work, but willing to become a student of not only scholarship and mastery in the art of teaching, but also connecting with people that are different than you. I think that any person that's willing to do that work and center the needs of that culture, that community, can teach our kids. So I want to first say that. But when we look across education, and we find that, over 85% of our teachers are white, and they're teaching in schools that are overwhelmingly Black and brown. When I think about the fact that our kids are receiving the lowest possible outcomes, I'm asking myself, I try to always imagine, I say, can I imagine that a staff that is 85 to 90% Black, and they were teaching a school, they were teaching in and leading a school that is 85 to 90% white kids. if they consistently over time were not able to produce outcomes that were on par with other children, how long will it take us? How long will it take the white community and others for us to start saying what's happening in teaching and learning? And certainly if there was an opportunity for reparations, a great deal of money needs to go and examine what are the barriers that are happening within our schools in which race seems to be such a critical component of kids being able to receive the teaching and then also to display mastery. I would love to see schools that are led by, you know, people of color, Black women, Black men. I would love to see schools that are, you know, schools for boys. I think that boys have sometimes unique challenges. We have Kansas City Girls Prep Academy that focuses exclusively on girls. I would like to see something for boys. And I think, you know, often too many times when you don't have diversity and inclusion and representation at the table when you're deciding curriculum and all those other things, you often have blind spots. And those blind spots not meaning that you intentionally mean to do harm, but it's kind of like when you're driving your car. That's why you still have a rear view mirror with all the bells and whistles in your car. If you are a good driver, when you're merging into a lane, you turn your head a little bit to see if there's someone there, because you know if you merge over and you're not paying attention to who's already in the lane, you can cause harm. And so I think when we become more diverse, we can look at what does it mean to have culturally relevant pedagogical practices. Maybe we can stop this wave of anti-Black curriculum. You know, when you start looking across the country and you see this legislation that's talk about woke, or, you know, if we just don't have these books from authors, or if we don't teach the authentic American history, most of that is centered in anti-Blackness. You know, you don't see people saying you can't have women's studies or Native American studies. You hear them talking about Black kids and Black studies. And so that we know that it's something about when our kids know who they are, when they're affirmed in the school, when the curriculum shows, depicts them doing great things, the news and all of that. So I don't know how you solve for that, certainly with reparations, but I will say that reparations is really about repair. And this country has done harm to Black folks. I mean, many of us are just doing ancestry to try to find our cousins, right? Slavery happened and it disrupted our ability to connect with our legacies, with our lineage. And so certainly if anyone has a case, I know that others have enjoyed reparations. Certainly we can look and see that even hundreds and hundreds of years from now, we are still grappling with some of these systems that have vestiges in racialized oppression.
Listen, I love your energy. I absolutely do. And I love your responses here. There's a couple comments here that actually roll into the next question that I wanted to ask you. And so one, he just says mental blight, and I'm going to explain that a little bit. And Regina Drone, she said, you're talking those blind spots. Right. And so this is something that's extremely important because I believe that our mindset plays a lot into the things that we're able to carry out successfully. And so when you go to, say, Overland Park or somewhere in Johnson County, you see all these beautiful buildings. You see very few abandoned homes or abandoned buildings. Everything looks great. And so it can give a child an optimistic view of life. You know, it shows them what's possible and what can be done. But then when you go to the other side of the tracks, you see all these dilapidated buildings, vacant lots, everything's run down, and it creates something that we like to call it, elevating men, mental blight, which just says that I don't know why, but for some reason I can't get out of my situation. I can't get out of this state of mind that I can't improve. The things around me are look destitute, and it leaves me with no hope, right? And so my next question for you is going to be, hypothetically, if Kansas City said, you know what, Dr. Hill, we have these buildings that are just going to be open, they're going to be vacant, and we're going to gift these buildings to Black KC, right? What would you do with those buildings?
Listen, so many things. I mean, first, where do I start? One, I think it's always important to talk to people in a community that are proximate to those buildings and find out what would they want to see, right? I think that that's by far Dr. Hill does not have all the answers. I do think that there's a way to take these buildings and create a teacher cottage. I think that it's important for people to actually live close to where they're teaching, right? So I think, one, I would take a building and say, one of the largest expenses that you have when you're young and out of college and getting your first job is your rent. So how can we create these school buildings and create apartments for our teachers, right? And a recruitment tool. The second thing that I would do is I would talk about, we have students that identify as, homeless, that are in transition. I can tell you, looking at the data, there were 1,992 students, which is 10% of the overall population of kids that identified as homeless in 2022. And this is more than double the state average. When we think about mobility and kids moving across, whether that's district to charter or to the neighboring school district, you had about nearly a fourth of all students in KCPS. It was like a little over 6,000 kids that had changed a school at least one time, right? So when we think about that, our McKinney-Vento kids, that's what they identify them as in the school district as experiencing homeless. Is there some housing that we can do for families so that that we can keep them in a place where there's housing, where there's resources, and maybe it's 6 months, maybe it's a year, but there's some transitional housing that we can provide for families. The next thing that I will be thinking about is, how can we create an incubation hub? When we're talking about, the school district has, I think they approved, I'm more familiar with KCPS, but I think other districts have done it, where they have a MBE, WBE, right? And so if you're thinking about 5% of your budget, and the budget is 200 million a year, right? If you do 5 or 10% of that, that's like $2 million that we can use to help incubate and start businesses and have them, particularly those who provide a service, whether that's urban farms, whether that's, taking women who know how to sew in, or men that can creating uniforms for our kids so they can buy them from local designers versus going to other big box companies that provide uniforms. When you're thinking about, cafeteria, there's so many things. People who work on the cars, the district buys a number of cars that they use to travel throughout. Who's doing the brakes? Who's changing the tires? Who's doing the oil change? So I think that we can use a building to take some of our, women and minority and disadvantaged businesses in, help them understand the back office, getting bonded, licensing, all of those things. And then one of the first contracts they can have is with the school district. Imagine if you were able to be the person that provides all the uniforms or changes all the brakes on the vehicles for KCPS. That contract has enough to, not only you're going to hire locally, you're going to be investing in the community, and we're talking about generational wealth, creating employment opportunities, partnering with our kids and having them to come in and learn how to do these things, right? So, I just think there are so many different things that we can do with buildings. Those are the kind of the first three that come to mind. And certainly, I'd be happy to be on any panel talking about it.
Well, Ms. Hill, you have vision. You have vision, and I love it. I absolutely love it. I do want you to know, like I said, I was speaking with District Rep Mike Johnson, and we're going to be putting together a meeting of the minds. And so I definitely want to invite you out to that. We're going to pull as many nonprofits together as possible and really start, talking about some solutions and seeing how we can work together. And so would you be open to that?
You got it. Sign me up. I would love to see innovative things happen, and also other career paths. You talked about real estate. If you think about it, our kids being able to, be a part of that industry, assess, you name it. Yes.
Love it. Okay, so before we wrap up, there's a couple things, so many things that you said that I want to unpack, but I know we've only got so much time, and so I may have to have you back on if you'd be willing to do that. But you said about the schools for girls and that there needs to be something like that for the boys. I wholeheartedly agree. With our nonprofit Elevating Men, one of the things that we're trying to do is really change the mindset of men in our communities. And so when we talk about education and the school system, one reason that I believe, and I've heard this before, there's a organization called BLAQUE, Brothers Liberating Our Community, Brother Cornell. And one thing that he said is that a lot of men don't get into teaching because if they're going to be the breadwinner or the head of household, for a lot of men, the wages just don't line up. And so are there any initiatives to increase the pay for our teachers, male or female, because they deserve it? They're shaping the future. They're shaping our children. How can we get them paid more?
First of all, I'm muting because my son is upstairs having a good old time on spring break. So I just want you to know that if
No
you
problem.
actually hear him in the background. So a couple of things. I have not read the latest approved union agreement. KCPS just approved that. But I hear, and from what I've been seeing on socials, is it increased teacher pay. So KCPS may be the organization has the highest salaries for teachers. That's one. So I just think as a country, not only do we need to pay our teachers more, but we also really have to talk about accountability, right? What does that look like if you can, continue to pay more, but we want to see outcomes actually improve for kids, right? So I think that that's important for us to do. I know that at the state legislature, there were some conversations around how can the state add dollars so that teachers can have bonuses. I would love to see pay for performance. I know everybody is not a fan of that and they think it creates a competitive culture. But I think when people want to come together to do great work and teachers are working hard and putting in extra hours, and they're working in some schools where the kids, it requires additional resources, I think those teachers ought to be recognized and paid additional for that service. So I would love to see the state legislature change that. What we often see with men is not only if they do take the step to enter in the school system, they're often in the compliance role or the punisher or get these kids together. And I just think that's so short-sighted. You often don't see men in leadership able to, be men and provide support to kids. I mean, my wildest dream is that one day, BLAQUE will have a boarding school. We think that there are kids that we would love to love on. And, you can give us the kids that are currently in foster care, right? Because I know there's a lot of conversations about how old is it before a kid leaves their parents. But right now we have, I think 40%. I was talking to Tahir Atwater. He works for Jackson County CASA, and I believe he said 40% of all the kids in foster care are African American. And so I think that there's a space for us to think about how do we provide a boarding school where we can provide all of those wraparound resources. But certainly, I think education sometimes wants to educate kids in this the appearances that it's race neutral or that it is, the ideal of America and not actually the lived experiences. And so Black men have a different experience. And so I think that our boys and our young men can be stronger and be more whole and complete when they learn from other Black men that can talk to them about being vulnerable, being, a stand-up person in the community, understanding how to balance the demands of the world and also still be a nurturer and a protector and a provider when they get older. I just think that, as I'm looking at my son's relationship with his dad, and I know we have a lot of households where fathers aren't always present, but we have a really strong community of Black men that love to be a part of shaping the next, the future lives of our kids. And I just think we haven't made those connections in ways. I think about 100 Black men, certainly your group Elevate. And I think a school for boys has the opportunity to position those Black men directly in school so they can have those conversations, because when most of your teachers are women, that's just how it is in education. Overwhelmingly more women, and they're white women who don't have the lens of what it means to live and walk in a world where you are a Black man. And so if we're not thinking about providing that wraparound support and coaching and love, then we're setting our kids up to leave this race neutral environment and enter a world that reminds them every day that they are Black. So
Listen, I'm with Andrew Boykin. Cokethea for president. You got it going on. I love your vision. I love your energy. I always ask this when I get ready to wrap up my shows, right? And I believe this is a very important question. And so let's just imagine for a quick second that a genie's lamp falls out of the sky, falls right in your lap, and you got 3 wishes. Those 3 wishes cannot be for yourself. They have to be for your community. What are your 3 wishes?
Ooh. Um, I think my first, that's a good question. Three. Let me try to narrow down to three. I think the first would be, I would ask the genie to reconcile this social construct of race. Um, i- if you're not a person of color, you just don't understand and have the lens for how much it impacts your day to day to day to day. And certainly, I could add on, gender and sexual orientation, but I would love us to be in a space where that's post, right? People are seen as human beings with a divine assignment and unlimited potential to do great things in the world. And that's what I would want for our society. The second wish would be that we have an amazing system of care for people, whether that's mental health, universal health care, uh, affordable housing opportunities. I would love for us to have a system of care where everybody can get a fair start, a just start, a moral start, and a good start to their life, right? If you look at some of the data around just infant mortality, you find that, again, Black women and Black children disproportionately are more likely to lose their life before their first birthday. So I really think that there's something about being in good health. And if you've ever been sick, you know that no matter how smart you are, or how much money you might have, if you look at people like Steve Jobs who died, that you need quality health care. And then third, man, um, third, I would like to see, wow, I would love to see there that all people are valued for who they are, right? That there's no hierarchy, there's no assigning, what you believe they can contribute, but that there's just everyone has value. And I think when you enter in and it's post-racial, these separating people by their differences. And then you have a place where we take care of you, have quality school, quality healthcare, quality housing, all those building blocks of a good life are fair and equitable. And then three, people meet people and believe that they have value. And that we're in this together. I think those are three things that, man, we could rock out this society if we just had those.
Listen, I love it. I love, and obviously there's a couple people that agree with you. Regina, she said, "You got me screaming at this phone. You own it." She got me about to scream too, so I feel you on that. Dinner and dialogue. She almost made me cuss in a good way with those three wishes. I just cast my vote for Cokethea. Miss Hill, thank you so much for taking a little bit of time out of your day to speak to our audience and just share some of your thoughts and your vision for our community. For those who want to connect with you, how can they do so?
Uh, you can follow me at BLAQUE. That's our handle for everything. And BLAQUE is BLAQUEKC. Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. We're getting ready to restart our podcast. I think that's important to touch people across different mediums. We're going to celebrate Dr. Collier as she is the first, when she signs her contract, is the first African-American woman to lead Kansas City Public Schools. We think that's important. We hope to have dialogue and would love to have other people just come to the table and talk to us about what are some things that we can elevate that are issues, to people in the community. So if you go on any one of those handles, DM us and tell us like, hey, can you guys host a talk on this? We might not be able to get through everything, but we want to be in a space and in partnership. And if there are things that you would like for BLAQUE to show up to or to sponsor, we don't have a lot of money, but we got a little bit of dollars, and we like to partner with and support people who are doing great work in our community, because it's going to take all of us, right? We certainly are not in a space where we think we have all the insight and knowledge and are working to get things done. We need you. And so join us. Let us join what you already have going on and be a good partner.
So you told the people how to connect with you. What do you need from the community? Like, what can we get behind? Are you guys taking donations? What does Black KC need to better serve the community?
You can, we will always tell you, you can go on that page and you can donate, but really what we need is your energy, your time. We need you to send us what are the things that we haven't, what blind spots do we have that we have not been given attention to? What are some tables that we need to sit at that we might not have known? So really, we need your advocacy. We need your thoughts. We need you to be in partnership with us. And we need all of that above resources. But certainly, if you don't have the time to do it, we appreciate if you come to our events. We appreciate if you donate to a good cause. And most importantly, man, volunteer at a school. Like, this summer, I have to say this summer, we are bringing back Freedom School. So I would be remiss if I didn't tell you guys that in June, we are launching Freedom School, because we said we cannot sit here and keep talking about low literacy scores when we know that we are a culture that taught our folks, our kids, our neighbors how to read in the face of being hung from trees. So we know that we have always connected reading to liberation. And so we are launching a 6 weeks Freedom School. Many of you guys might know we need speakers. We need people that will come in, help serve lunch. We need people that will be readers. So please hit us up on the socials and let us know that you are somebody that wants to come and volunteer with our Freedom School. Those dates are June 12th through July 21st. So yes, we need you.
Love it. Last question.
Yes.
Did you have fun?
Awesome. I always, you can tell I love to talk, right? So I'm no stranger to talking, but I want us to grow, and it's really a movement, and we want to be a part of that movement building, and certainly linking arms and support. And so thank you. I mean, I'll come on anything you have, especially when people like cheering, because sometimes people are like, oh, hell no, you don't need to be doing this. So thank you.
Well, just so you know, this is here on Facebook. It's on LinkedIn. It's also on YouTube, and it'll go out in the A.L. Johnson Life Insurance Agency newsletter that's published every Friday morning. And so more people will see this. If you came in late, you need to rewind this to the beginning, because she dropped a whole lot of gems for you. And so I definitely don't want you to miss out. Before you go, Ms. Hill, can you give me a little virtual fist bump?
Boom.
Boom. Yeah, that's us agreeing on those 3 wishes. That's us connecting. And like I said, we do have a meeting that we're putting together with Mike Johnson, state representative, where we're going to bring together the nonprofit organizations that we're connected to, and we're going to talk about solutions. And so I definitely want to have you at the table. Thank you again so much for your time. For those of you that are tuning in, visit BLAQUE.com. Support Dr. Hill in our efforts, because it's all about making a better future for our children. I'm waiting on mine, or I'll be popping mine too, but I'm waiting on my Black KC sweatshirt. But again, thank you all for tuning in, and we will see you next time.